Hi, I'm Will,
And I'm Brian.
and I'm going to be looking at the relationship between the number of native and invasive species in the prairies of PCBI.
I'll be looking at ways of optimizing spotted napkin removal for land managers. With our mentor, Dr. Vinny Girdler. Our experiment is divided, I guess, into two portions, although we will and are working on them in equal amounts. It just one will have Will's name stamped on it, and one will have mine.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little background. Back in 2002, Shane Chesson used modeling to generate this result here, and that was published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution. What this is, it's a graph of number of native species and the number of native species, number of exotic species. And the different colors indicate different sampling locations. So for the purposes of prairies, you could think of red as being one prairie, another one being a different prairie. And within prairies, they saw a downward correlation, a negative correlation between the number of native species and the number of invasive species. And between these, they actually saw a positive correlation between prairies. Within prairies, that's thought to be the negative correlation is thought to be due to species-species interaction, and between prairies that would be intrinsic abiotic factors. But that's just a model. They never actually tested it, so that's what we are here to do. So the first thing we did was we selected a prairie, then we would randomly select a 55 by 40 meter plot in the prairie. Then we would subdivide that plot into 5 by 5 meter plots. We would choose regularly spaced 24 of those 5 by 5 meter plots. In the northeast corner of those, we took a 0.75 by 0.75 meter subplot again, and those are in red here. In each of those corners, we quantified and also identified all plant species present, and obviously assigned whether they were native or invasive. Additionally, in those red sample areas, we took soil samples. Okay, so far what we've done, this is Brian at our first sampling location that's out in the Mideast Prairie behind the Ed building. This is also where Brian is doing his experiment. And that's just me identifying some plants. So far what I've found, it's really not much. We've seen little or to no correlation between the number of native and invasive species. And also, if I go back here, we haven't seen this thought to be abiotic filtration. All of this seems to be kind of clustered, but we have 4 more prairies to do. We're working on our 3rd here right now, and one thing that we have found is that the Mideast Prairie it's a clay prairie, and the northern prairie has sandier, richer soil, and we have found that there are significantly more plant species in the North Prairie than the Mideast Prairie. So, as I said, we have 4 more prairies. 1 more at PCCI. We're doing that in the Southwest Prairie. When you're driving in, you can see us. We're doing 1 at the Lillian Anderson Arboretum. That is owned by Kalamazoo College. We're doing 2 more prairies at the Kalamazoo Nature Center, also in Kalamazoo. And what we can do with this soil data also, this is kind of a side result that we can use this data for, is we can look at where plants tend to reside based on soil sampling. What areas plants prefer based on the soil.
So this will be my portion, is the experimental portion. Nice. So we'll be actually introducing spotted knapweed into the Mideast Prairie. This is a picture we got using the GIS. This is the education building right here, and that's where we're setting up in the Mideast Prairie plot that Will has shown earlier. We're measuring 2 impacts, I suppose, on the prairie. There's disturbance, what we call as propagule pressure. Disturbance is 50% of the species in those 0.75 by 0.75 meter plots. Removing it, it doesn't matter, either invasive or native. And then in some of the plots we're using propagule pressure, which is the amount of, in our case, spotted knapweed actually introduced into the prairie. Low forcing would be only introducing 4 plants, transplanting them into the plot, while high forcing is 12 plants being introduced into the plot. It's the right one. Nice. So my hypothesis for this experiment is that disturbance, just by removing 50% of the species, and high forcing, introducing 12, in the prairie will allow the establishment of spotted knapweed, Centaurea maculosa, into the prairie, will better enable spotted knapweed to grab a foothold into the environment and thus prosper or grow with more efficiency. So thus far, we had to do about 8 weeks of prep at Kalamazoo College in our greenhouse. So this is, we set out seeds on a petri dish, you can see here. They're germinating away. Once they germinate, we transplant them into these plugs. It's a picture of our wonderful plants thriving in the greenhouse. We were also able to, as Will mentioned, identifying species as Will, doing what he does best, sitting. And he's got his little book out there. And if we can't actually get the species, we do give them little cute nicknames, such as Fuzzy, Softy, Wolfpack, etc., just based on characteristics or just, I don't know, what we think of at the time. So we're rhyme or reason for it. We've also been able to conduct the first part of our experiment, which is the disturbing selective plots and introducing spotted knapweed. There's me planting it and Will ready to squirt it with water once we get it all situated with soil. So that's where we've gotten so far. We're about waiting 5-ish weeks before we remove then all plant matter and then measuring with biomass determine kind of the thriving of spotted knapweed and just invasives in general. So we have, although we've only been here 2 weeks now, we have encountered some obstacles. We have the germination rate in the greenhouse was really low, it's about 15%. So we had to plant about 1,200 seeds, or germinate 1,200 seeds in order to get the required amount that we needed, which was rather frustrating. It caused a rather large gradient of age of plants. So some had started at 8 weeks, some we didn't get planted until about 5 weeks later. So it kind of created that discrepancy. Other was the weather. We had monsoon season this week. So this is us after we got caught in the rain. That's our mentor, Vinny. And so the weather's been kind of made it more challenging to go out and maintain and check on our plants. So watering hasn't been a problem. We're almost concerned with overwatering at this point, which would not be good. Yes?
And some other obstacles. Soil sample preparation is a small one, but sorting clay in screens is very difficult. You have to have just the right amount of frozen, not too frozen, otherwise it won't sort. So we spent probably 14 hours just on 24 samples getting those done, whereas the North Prairie only took about 2 hours for all 24 samples. And plant identification, some of the plants that we're looking at and identifying out there, they're young, because we're not at the end of summer yet. And if you ask a 4-year-old to draw you a picture of a plant, I mean, that's the plant they draw. It's just so general. It doesn't look like anything. It has a leaf, and it looks like every other plant that there is. But we know what these plants look like. We have samples of them. And we're going to be going back. In some cases, we flagged growing plants. We're going to be going back to all of our sampling sites to keep up with them as they mature and develop, and hopefully identify every plant that we find.
So that's all we've done so far.
Any questions?
Yes.
So I know here at PCCI, prairies are managed, right? They're burned and they have poles for spotted knapweed. I'm assuming that your other sites look to me like they're also probably areas that are managed. Is that true?
Yeah, so we are trying to look at, we're trying to look at prairies, and obviously managed prairies are going to hopefully be the most abundant. So we are using PCCI for that. Kalamazoo Nature Center has some very high quality, very well managed prairies there as well. But the Lillian Anderson Arboretum does not. It has an old field is where we're going to be sampling from, and we're using that kind of, if you go, I mean you don't have to, but the graph that I showed at the beginning, the one at the very bottom.
Because I guess I would expect that in an unmanaged prairie, you might get data like that, but that in a managed prairie, if you're managing it correctly, you would probably not see something.
Are you talking about the negative correlation or the positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're managing and you're pulling spotted knapweed, burning to try to remove invasive, that you will be eliminating a lot of those. So you might, you know, you're altering your environment. You're not using a natural environment, so you probably won't see that type of
Right.
correlation.
The reason we are choosing these several different prairies is North Prairie was planted in 2005, so we expect that high amount of species to be there because it is like the youngest prairie, if you will. And there are a significant number of invasive species that they haven't removed. There's hawkweed out there, regular clover; those are all invasive. Granted, we don't see a lot of multifloral rose, probably because of the removal, but we have seen there are a number of invasive species that they haven't removed, or maybe for some reason or another not paid quite as much attention to, as much as the spotted knapweed. We didn't actually, for that purpose, I didn't see any spotted knapweed in the Mid-East Prairie because Jen had said that it was going to be, because it was so well managed. But North Prairie, we found some, and we expect to see some in our next prairie, which is the Southwest. But you're right, that is something to take into consideration, that management, because it is, in a way, influencing what we will find in terms of native and invasive relationships. But there are still invasives present, multiple invasives especially.
And also, to go along with that, is your main concern that if we're pulling out these plants, that we're not necessarily filling up the community, so that you wouldn't see that negative correlation because there's still open niches for plants to come in, so they're not competing. But this is, I mean, as Brian just said, if we aren't looking at any prairies that have been extremely recently fully disturbed or planted, we're looking at prairies that have had time for plants to come in and fill back up that competition. As far as the positive correlation goes, even in this type of, even in a managed area, you might actually see that just based on intrinsic properties of the prairie. That, I mean, even with the land management regimen, you can't control like a clay prairie versus a sandy, loamy prairie versus just really rich farmland.
And I just have one comment to, just not to be a little bit helpful. It's often hard to keep up with nomenclatural changes, and Centaurea maculosa is no longer the used name. It's Centaurea stovina, so might want to update your nomenclature.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course.
Gotta use the current name, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know what we're talking about now. You're talking about spotted
You're going to see maculosa in most of the
right. Yeah, and I think
published
from the
literature, except things that are really